everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Lions Grid. Happy Monday, one and all. Joe, unfortunately, today we're not able to come in and talk about a Lions victory, but we'll toss up the score here. Pretty good game the Lions played against the Chiefs. Joe, what are your just initial reactions to yesterday's close one against the Chiefs?
My initial reaction is I think they lost the game because I didn't choose the Lions to win the game. Um, if I would have chose the Lions to win the game, maybe they would have won. But definitely tough to see the Lions get down to the goal line twice, or within the 5 yard line, and have two turnovers within the five, and then the one play by Kerryon Johnson that he's at the one and he for some reason feels like he's close enough to extend the football over the goal line or try to get it over the goal line, and then he fumbles it and returns for 6 points for Kansas City. And it's like, that's a 12-point swing in the game right there. You don't fumble that, you get the touchdown. I think the Lions would be able to win.
Yes.
Then,
Oh, yeah, go on.
Then, that 4th and 8, they've been rushing three all game, not really getting to Mahomes. You got 8 guys in coverage. You would think you'd be able to only have one play quarterback spy so he doesn't take off. He's a threat with his legs. So if they would have just had a linebacker play QB spy on him, they could have ended the game right there. So a few mistakes, but overall they played a really good game. And I think if they ever ran into him again throughout the course of the season, I think they feel confident in their ability to correct their mistakes and win the football game.
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at how this game sort of fits into the bigger picture of the Lions season, the games that they won against the Chargers and against Philadelphia, they also had mistakes in those games, but they were able to overcome those and come out with a victory in both of those games. I think, obviously the difference between the game this weekend against the Chiefs and those previous games is that, the Chiefs are, for the most part, pretty much a consensus number 2 ranked team in the NFL. So they're a much better team. And you can't make the type of mistakes that the Lions had and still expect to come out with a win. That being said, they played a very good game. To your point, Joe, there were a couple of really heartbreaking moments in that game where I feel like Lions teams of the past would have been very likely to fold in those situations and almost throw in the towel. And this year's Lions team, they just kept fighting and really took the Chiefs pretty much to the distance, made them keep fighting the whole way to get this win. So, we talked about it before the game, Joe, about how, depending on how the Lions played in this game, a loss would almost reveal more than a win would, because we just didn't think a win was very likely. So, yeah, in terms of how I'm feeling after yesterday's game, certainly feeling pretty good about the Lions, and almost at this point, my expectations for them are almost ready to shift. It's not quite there yet where I think they can play with anybody in the league. They're almost to that point. I really want to see how they're going to come out against the Packers here in 2 weeks. Obviously they're going to have the bye week next week, and then they'll have that Monday night showdown with the Packers. To me, this was a great performance against the Chiefs, but I want to see them, make the most of this time that they're going to have before the Packers game and really come out against the Packers. And at that point, if they play a very good game, they've played a good game against the Chiefs. If they come out here and make the most of this bye week and look sharp against the Packers, at that point, I'm pretty much ready to say, yeah, the Lions are a legitimate threat to win every game they have the rest of the way.
Yeah, I looked at their schedule and I'm thinking to myself, here's a schedule I was looking at. And I was like, if they make it through the first, 5 or 6 games, with a decent record, they have a good chance at winning the rest of their games to make the playoffs. And now looking at the remainder of their schedule, it's like, okay, well, a lot of their opponents, have changed things up, and they might be more competitive than originally thought. And one thing to note about the game, I thought the Lions outplayed the Chiefs. Mahomes was shut down for the most part. Their run game, wasn't as big as it typically is, or not typically, but just it wasn't big. And the big thing that hurt them were the big plays. There was the big plays on defense, the turnovers, the you know they ran the ball well, they threw the ball well, and the thing that cost them was just turnovers and defense not being able to be clutch like they've been the last 2 weeks. We've seen in the last 2 weeks, the defense kind of, about to give up the game, and then some way they end up stopping the opponent from winning the game, whether it be by luck or by uh, talent. But I feel like, the Lions deserved to win this game. And I feel like they lost by kind of bad luck instead of, being outplayed.
Yeah, and we'll take a look here. I'll go ahead and throw up. Let's take a look at the team stats here. So pretty even game overall, Joe. You can see, first downs, both teams there with 29. The Lions did run slightly more plays than the Chiefs. They did win the battle of possession there, holding it for 33 minutes and 54 seconds compared to the Chiefs' 26 minutes and 6 seconds. Yardage, they were just ahead there. The Chiefs did have the edge in the passing yards, but of course the Lions, Kerryon Johnson, a 100-yard day rushing for him, so the Lions got the edge on the rushing side of things. And then, Joe, as you pointed out, there were the 2 red zone trips for the Lions that didn't end up with points. You can see for both teams, the Chiefs going 3 for 5 in red zone trips, the Lions going 3 for 6. Both teams right around the same penalties and penalty yards, and then the Chiefs with one more turnover than the Lions. So, yeah, really, looking at the team stats there, very, very close between these two teams. And Joe, like I said earlier, I think it really comes down to the fact that as opposed to the games against the Chargers and the Eagles and even the Cardinals before that, where they were very close games as well, those teams weren't, those teams definitely are not as good as Kansas City, right? So it's much harder, I think, to win those close games and have the mistakes that the Lions had against a better opponent. So, wasn't really surprised that the Lions in the end didn't end up getting the win, but they did still feel like, for the most part, they up until once it got to the point where they were chucking up the Hail Marys, I wasn't holding out much hope at that point. But certainly they were in that game really for all 4 quarters. So got to give the Lions credit because the Chiefs are the number 2 team in a lot of power rankings. We don't even have the Lions in our top 5. So good to see them come out here and really play a close game against a team that a lot of people think is the superior team.
Yeah, one player to note, Justin Coleman. I feel like he had a really good game. He played good coverage, and he was able to create a couple turnovers. So he was very effective as the number 1 corner with Slay's absence. And it's like it's a disappointing loss because you never expected them to win the game. And then when they started playing well, they got the lead. And then when they were doing good in the game against Kansas City, you're like, oh my gosh, we could beat Kansas City. Then you really start rooting for them. And then of course, they make a few mistakes. But one thing I think that they're going to have to address in the bye week is better defensive football, because Patricia's known for being a defensive coordinator, playing relatively good defense, but he has been known to give up points on defense with his play calling and everything. But I think they should try to address that in the bye week. Minnesota, Chicago, and Green Bay all have pretty good defenses. When you look at the weak thing on the Lions team, it's team defense. So I think if you can up their defense, I think you can be more competitive and win more football games throughout the season. I was looking at the stats. The Lions are top 10 in every offensive category, but then looking at their defense, they're 20 and below in every category. So they're going to need to improve that.
Yeah, I do think this was a decent game, though, from a defensive perspective for the Lions. One of the touchdowns obviously coming on that fumble return, so not much, the defense can do there. And when you look at it, this was I think the first time since 2018 that Patrick Mahomes didn't throw for a touchdown pass. So, um, you know, good on the Lions there to shut him down. They did have the 3 turnovers they forced. One guy that I'm really liking is Kennard, the linebacker. He's making some plays and getting in those backfields and giving quarterbacks being quite the hassle for them, which is nice because Joe, as we've talked about, we obviously invested quite a bit in the defensive line. And as of yet, it really hasn't felt like the defensive line has stepped up their play. But Kennard is definitely a guy that's kind of filling that void and getting after the quarterback. And along with Justin Coleman, those are 2 guys at the moment who I think are really playing some really good football and coming through clutch at times for the Lions.
He almost had that one-handed interception in the end zone. If you saw that, he got his hand in between the receiver, and it would have been an amazing play. Probably number 1 on SportsCenter if he was able to come up with the pick, but couldn't complete that play, which was close, but no cigar.
Yep, and of course, the Lions' defense was without Darius Slay. Quandre Diggs, I think, went down early in the game, too. And, of course, Mike Daniels and Deshaun Hand weren't there. And then I think Mike Ford came back at some point, but I know he did. He had to leave the field a little bit for an injury. So, as we mentioned, the Lions are coming into this. Their next week is a bye week, so time for them to get healthy, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when they play the Packers on Monday Night Football, because I do think they turned in an all right defensive performance. It was definitely borderline good because, again, Patrick Mahomes and that Kansas City offense has been on fire. And they did do a good job. They stopped him from throwing a touchdown pass. They forced him into making some mistakes. I liked what I saw. They're obviously not at full strength with those injuries. But hopefully with the bye week and that extra week to prepare for the Packers, I'm hoping to see some really good defense on that Monday night, because I think the elements are there. We're just still waiting to see them reach their final form, and they haven't quite gotten there yet. But there have been some flashes of what they could look like if they're playing at a high level.
Yeah, I think this gives the team confidence. Not that they didn't have confidence coming into the football game, but, now we know Stafford's playing some of the best football of his career. We can run the ball against teams that are susceptible to giving up yards on the run. And we can compete with anybody is what this game tells me. And just looking forward to watching every game this season because, they'll be in every game and they'll be competitive. So definitely when you take a look at the NFC North, like we're going to do for the, I think tomorrow's episode, the Kings of the North, I mean, Lions definitely could make a case and a run to become the division winners this year if they, keep up competitive football. And they're going to have to set the tone against Green Bay. Green Bay's sitting at number 1 in the division. So they're going to have to set the tone when they play them in a few weeks.
And of course, as we've pointed out on the show before, Joe, the Lions are undefeated against the Packers since we've been doing the Lions grid. So we'll have to, certainly it seems like the odds are in their favor given that stat. But speaking of stats, we'll take a look here.
You keep saying that, trying to broadcast jinx it, man.
Well, I might be trying to turn the tide. I can neither confirm nor deny what what I'm trying to do there. But speaking of game stats, taking a look here at the game leaders, to your point, Joe, Stafford had a very good game, even dealing with that hip injury, 21 of 34 for 291 yards, 3 touchdowns. Leading receiver for the Lions was Marvin Jones Jr. for 3 receptions for 77 yards. And then, as mentioned, Kerryon Johnson, 26 carries, 125 yards there. And you can see over on the left how the Chiefs stat leaders picked up. Mahomes throwing for 315, Kelsey with a bunch of catches and some yards, and then LaShawn McCoy a handful of carries and a touchdown. But certainly some good stat lines there for the Lions.
I think what we know from this game is that we've seen Galladay play good before, but Galladay has come up clutch. He's showing, field awareness. That second touchdown he got with the toe drag, Just making tough catches in general against the defense, catches in traffic. I think the Lions found their number one wide receiver. I think Marvin Jones is the possession receiver. And I think when you look at Danny Amendola and his role is, kind of like the slot receiver that can get you 5 to 8 yards, but isn't going to rack up the yards after catch.
Yeah, and to go along with that, the passing attack, it was nice to see Kerryon come out and have a 100-yard rushing day. We've sort of been waiting for that Lions running attack to sort of appear all season long through the first, it's only been 4 games now, but through the first 3 games, it really wasn't there, even though last week, Kerryon Johnson had 20-plus carries. The yardage just wasn't there. And then he comes out, and obviously he did have the fumble, which, it is what it is. But just looking at the rest of the day, it was nice to see that running game materialize because it hadn't been there. And so hopefully that isn't like a fluke. Hopefully moving forward we see that continue and we can see some yardage from the ground because I think if that Lions offense is clicking both through the air and on the ground, it creates a lot of problems for teams to match up with.
I like the playmaking ability of McKissick. He's made a few plays this season, but definitely in Kansas City game, he stepped up a little bit. Fairly unknown player, and he's starting to have field awareness and make plays running the football. Dodging tackles, breaking tackles, and his yards per carry are very high due to very few attempts, but he's making the most when he's in there.
Yeah, it seems like anytime he's not touching the ball very often, but when he does, when they do insert him in, it's usually like a play or two that they get him in the offense. So far, those have been coming up pretty clutch for the Lions. So, and I also saw I want to say Michael Hall is his name, the wide receiver we added. Obviously, Jamal Agnew was having those couple of issues after the first 2 weeks of the season, and they brought in Michael Hall. He's another wide receiver. Of course, they also had cut Travis Fulgham, and then they signed him to the practice squad, so it opened up a roster spot. So he's one of the guys trying to fill in as the 4th and 5th receiver. But a big part of him coming on the team because he's mostly known as a return guy was in case something they had to make a change from Agnew. But it was nice even to see him make a good catch and a contribution to the Lions team during the game. So originally brought in to be a return guy, potential substitute for Agnew, but coming in and making a pretty decent catch during the game. It's nice to see that there are guys further down on the roster that are stepping up, even though they might not get to touch the ball very often. It's nice that we have guys who can come in and for a play at least are making positive contributions to the team.
Yeah, the secondary got beat up as well. A few injuries during the game in that. Really, you're just hoping that the team, most of the injuries we look at are all on defense. And it's like, hopefully some of these guys come back, refreshed and able to play competitive football again. That's just one thing I want to watch for is, better defensive football. I know they shut down Mahomes for the most part, but I think that they have enough talent there to give up fewer yards, to shut down the run, to shut down the pass. And I think that's something they'll focus on in the bye week and look to improve on.
Yeah, and to your point, Joe, obviously it's nice having this bye week heading into the Packers. But regarding injuries, it is kind of a concern because, obviously having your bye week here in week 5, that means you're going to have to play 12 consecutive games before the playoffs. So, keeping injuries to a minimum. Hopefully we'll get lucky there and we won't see a lot of big injuries come the Lions' way. And hopefully they can get healthy during this bye week. But with having the bye week so early, it is nice because it gives us that extra week to get prepared to go into Lambeau and try and get that win. But the flip side of that, the sort of negative part is that they do have to play 12 consecutive games to close the season then and hope to stay relatively healthy because injuries certainly happen to every team. Some teams make it out a little more lucky than the others, but it is going to be quite the run the Lions are going to have to go on to close out the season with the bye week positioned as it is.
Yeah, they've been playing football since August and now September. So there's 60 days. Basically, what you have left is October, November, and December. So 90 days. So, 12 weeks of competitive football is definitely going to take more of a toll on the body than the August preseason. But hopefully, what we see here is just, the start of the season, the bumps and the bruises, getting used to the game again, figuring out what it's like to compete in the NFL and take a hit or, give a hit and all that type of stuff. And, hopefully their bodies become more adapted to be able to play the game without injury in the final 12 weeks.
Yeah, and hopefully they can. I think a big part is avoiding, major injuries. It's one thing if you have to sit out a week or two with an injury, but obviously you want to try to avoid any of the major season-ending stuff because that's sort of where you can sort of get by having the next man up for a couple of weeks, but if it's the next man up for multiple weeks, that's where it gets a little tricky and a little dicey. So, knock on wood. Hopefully, the Lions after they can get healthy this week with the bye week, and then hopefully moving through this 12-game stretch, they can hopefully avoid any major injuries. Because I mean that's sort of what all teams are trying to do, and that's where luck does come into play quite a bit because you can't control who's going to get hurt or how bad or anything like that. So hopefully fortune will smile on the Lions because it is going to be interesting to see how they can hold up over this 12-game stretch, but certainly gives them an advantage here. And we'll talk about it a little more tomorrow during our episode, taking a look at the Kings of the North segment, as you mentioned, Joe. But gonna be nice for the short term. We'll have to see if it pays off for the long term for the Lions.
For sure.
Well, that's going to cover it for today's episode. As mentioned, a close game there between the Lions and the Chiefs. Sadly, not going in our favor, but still, I think quite a few positives to focus on from the Lions, and still stuff to clean up. Don't get me wrong, but overall, I think a pretty good game, and hopefully, as we've talked about, Joe, here, the Lions will be able to capitalize on this bye week they have before the Packers game, and turn that into a win. But if you did enjoy today's show, please do help the channel grow. Go ahead and hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing. We have a goal of trying to reach 100 subscribers so we can unlock the custom URL for our YouTube channel. We're making good progress there, but if you haven't done so already, it's probably the best way you can help support us, and we really do appreciate it. So if you can and are willing to, please do subscribe to the channel. You can also ring the bell. The bell's going to be on that side. And you'll get an alert on your browser or your mobile device when we go live with our next video, which, as we've talked about, is going to be tomorrow's episode, The Kings of the North, our third installment in the series, where we'll break down the NFC North standings, talk about everything that happened this past weekend, or this past week, because the Packers played on Thursday against the Eagles. Of course, the Vikings and the Bears squared off. Quite a few changes here in the NFC North, so we'll go over everything there and sort of forecast things as the Lions have the bye week. But until that next video, I'm Kevin Marheine. He's Joe Wilmot. We will see you during the next video. Bye-bye.